My name is Elena, and I am 33 years old. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Los Angeles Memorial Hospital buzzed erratically above me, casting long shadows against the sterile linoleum floor. The air in the intensive care unit smelled sharply of industrial bleach and suffocating anxiety. Dr. Eris stood in front of me, his stethoscope draped around his neck, looking grave. He explained that my mother, Clara, had suffered arterial blockage. The situation was critical, and she required an emergency cardiac bypass surgery within the next 4 hours. The surgical suite was prepped and ready, but the hospital administration required a mandatory $25.00 upfront payment before they would proceed with the life-saving operation. I nodded confidently, reaching into my purse for my phone, and told the surgeon to prepare my mother because I had the money available. For the past 9 years, I had worked exhausting 80-hour weeks as a senior forensic accountant, specializing in international asset recovery. My husband, Julian, and I shared a joint emergency savings account that we had funded for years, specifically designed for catastrophic events like this, and opened my mobile banking application, expecting to see our comfortable $85,000 balance sitting in the vault. The blue loading circle spun on my screen for 3 seconds, before the numbers finally populated. My heart stopped in my chest. The available balance displayed in bright red text was 0. 00. I blinked furiously, my hands beginning to shake as I manually refreshed the secure application 3 times, praying for a simple technical glitch. But the 0 remained an unyielding. I navigated to the transaction history ledger, my breath caught in my throat. At 7 a.m. that morning, an outgoing wire transfer had been initiated, draining the entire $85, thousand balance down to the last cent. Panic clamped around my windpipe, making the sterile hospital air feel impossibly thin. My mother was lying in a hospital bed, 30 feet down the hallway, trusting me to save her life, and our entire financial safety net had been maliciously evaporated. I dialed Julian's personal cell phone number. The phone rang 5 times before he finally answered. A loud blast of upbeat tropical house music erupted through the small speaker, accompanied by the distinct clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the cheerful roaring of a crowd. Julian answered the phone with a careless laugh echoing in his throat, asking what I wanted. I gripped the plastic edge of the hospital reception desk so tightly, my knuckles turned white, and told him my mother was dying in a hospital bed and the surgical team needed $25,000 to save her life. I demanded to know where our life savings had gone and why the emergency account was empty. Julian let out an annoyed sigh, acting as if my mother fighting for her literal survival was merely an inconvenient interruption to his spectacular afternoon. "I told you I had real estate moves to make today, Elena," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "We closed on a breathtaking $2 million oceanfront compound in Malibu. I needed the liquid cash to finalize the escrow. You are going to have to figure out your mother's situation on your own." I stood paralyzed in the chaotic hospital corridor, trying to process the sheer callousness of his words. He had intentionally stolen our entire life savings to purchase a luxury mansion while my mother was waiting for life-saving surgery. Before I could even scream my fury into the receiver, the phone rustled and a different voice came on the line. It was Beatrice, my mother-in-law. "Stop harassing my son and ruining his celebration." Beatrice hissed, her voice dripping with the same condescensory twist she had been serving me since the first day Julian and I met. "He is busy entertaining elite society people right now. Go ask your own, working-class family for the medical money, assuming they can even afford it." Beatrice had always despised my humble roots. She practically worshipped the concept of generational wealth, exclusive country clubs, and high society legacy. To her, I was nothing more than a charity case from a poor neighborhood who had somehow tricked her handsome golden boy into marriage. She hung up the phone before I could formulate a response, leaving me listening to the dead dial tone. A normal person might have collapsed right there on the hospital floor and cried hysterically. But I am not a normal person. I am a senior forensic accountant who specifically specializes in investigating multi-million-dollar corporate fraud and international embezzlement. I track down hidden stolen assets for a living, and I am exceptionally, terrifyingly good at my job, and did not shed a single tear in that hospital hallway. Instead, I walked purposefully over to the nearest waiting area, sat down on a hard plastic chair, and pulled my encrypted laptop out of my leather briefcase. If Julian honestly thought he could steal my money and leave my mother to die, he severely underestimated the woman he had married. I connected to the secure hospital network, bypassing the standard consumer banking application, and logged into the deep-level financial tracking software I utilized for my wealthiest corporate clients. Julian was an ambitious commercial real estate broker who loved to flash his designer watches and custom-tailored Italian suits. He craved the validation of being seen as a titan of high society. But the harsh, undeniable reality was that my quiet corporate income had been funding his extravagant, fake lifestyle for nearly a decade. He secretly resented my financial success, because his fragile masculine ego could not handle a woman earning significantly more money than him. He had no idea what kind of digital power I actually wielded. I traced the outgoing wire transfer through a complex, layered maze of banking nodes. Julian had attempted to be clever by routing the stolen money through 3 different external holding accounts before finally depositing it into a newly formed business entity. He was sloppy. Within 6 minutes, I had extracted the routing number, the destination bank, and the legal name of the holding company. He had named it Vanguard Legacy. The sheer arrogance of using my stolen money to fund his mother's delusion of a royal family dynasty made my blood boil with a fury. I dug much deeper, accessing the secure public county records for Vanguard Legacy, and needed to see how he had managed to structure the purchase of this sprawling Malibu oceanfront compound. He had used the stolen $85,000 as a mere down payment, but an estate in that exclusive neighborhood cost millions. I cross-referenced the holding company name with state property records and finally located the primary lender, Zenith Financial. They were a notoriously ruthless private equity firm known for high-risk predatory lending practices. Julian had not drained our emergency savings account. He had taken out a leveraged mortgage under this brand-new corporate entity. But the most glaring, catastrophic piece of evidence was right there, glowing brightly on my high-definition computer screen. To secure a loan of that size from Zenith Financial, Julian required a guarantor with credit and a verified annual income. His own personal credit score was due to his constant reckless overspending and multiple failed business ventures. I hacked into the secure county clerk database and pulled up the official loan origination document. There, at the bottom of the final contract page, was my full legal name and my confidential social security number. He had maliciously forged my signature to secure a $5.2 million mortgage. He had legally tied my identity to a mountain of debt for a luxury house I did not even know existed. This was no longer a husband being selfish and greedy. This was federal financial fraud. I found the registered physical address for the Vanguard Legacy property. It was located inside the most exclusive, guarded gated community in Malibu. I closed my laptop and packed it away inside my leather briefcase and walked back to my mother's room, where the attentive nurses were adjusting her various heart monitors. I pulled the head surgical nurse aside into the quiet hallway and looked her dead in the eye and told her with certainty that I would be back soon with the full $25, zero-zone payment in hand. I asked her to please keep my mother comfortable and monitored until I returned. She nodded with a sympathetic smile, promising she would ensure her stability. I walked out of the glass doors of the hospital building, with a singular dangerous focus burning deep inside my chest. The bright California sun hit me, but I felt numb to the warm weather and got into my car, gripped the leather steering wheel tightly, and sped toward the oceanfront mansion. Julian and Beatrice thought they had won the ultimate prize. They were about to learn why you never ever steal from a senior forensic accountant. The war had begun, and I was going to take everything from them, and pushed open the ornate wrought iron gates of the sprawling Malibu estate. The cool ocean breeze carried the rich scent of catered exotic seafood and premium imported champagne. Inside the property, a live string quartet played on a sprawling manicured lawn that stretched toward the crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean. Right in the center of the garden, standing beneath a white floral archway, was my mother-in-law, Beatrice. I marched purposefully toward her, my sensible heels clicking sharply against the imported stone pathway. Beatrice was speaking loudly, ensuring everyone in her immediate vicinity heard her bragging. "Look at what my brilliant son Julian has built," Beatrice announced pompously, gesturing broadly toward the towering glass windows of the oceanfront mansion. "This is true undeniable generational wealth, ladies." The polite smiles faded as they finally took in my out-of-place presence. "I need my $85,000 back right now," I stated firmly, my voice slicing through the delicate string music. Beatrice let out a forced, theatrical laugh, glancing nervously at her friends. She took a threatening step toward me, lowering her voice to a harsh, aggressive whisper. "Look at you. You are making a fool of yourself in front of my guests." "You stole the money for my mother's emergency surgery," I replied, taking a deliberate step closer, refusing to be intimidated. The classical music seemed to fade as people nearby stopped their polite conversations to watch our confrontation. "The authorities?" she scoffed loudly. "You think the police care about some working-class girl complaining about her husband's brilliant finances? Julian is a prominent broker in this city and are nothing but an anchor dragging him down. He used his money to secure our family legacy. You should be down on your knees thanking him for elevating your mediocre life." I opened my mouth to demand the stolen funds again, but a sudden hard shove from my left side knocked me off balance. Chloe stepped in front of me, blocking my direct path to her mother. Julian's spoiled younger sister held an overflowing glass of red wine, wearing a look of unearned superiority. Before I could regain my footing, Chloe thrust her hand forward, intentionally splashing the dark crimson liquid onto the chest of my simple beige blazer. The wine soaked through the fabric, leaving a humiliating stain across my shirt. "Oh my goodness," Chloe gasped with a terribly fake look of shock. "I am so clumsy," she smirked wickedly, her eyes flashing with malice. "But honestly, Elena, that cheap blazer looks like off-the-rack trash anyway. Consider the wine stain a improvement." Chloe laughed loudly, and Beatrice's elite friends eagerly joined the mocking chorus. "This is high society. This is the Vanguard standard. Go back to whatever cheap discount store you crawled out of before you ruin our aesthetic." The sheer disrespect was designed specifically to break me. They wanted me to cry and run out the iron gates in shame. Instead, I wiped a single drop of wine from my cheek and stood my ground with stillness. Before I could verbally retaliate, an aggressive hand clamped down on my shoulder. Julian grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the watching crowd, and dragging me down a hallway toward the back of the mansion. He shoved me into a dark, sprawling study and slammed the mahogany door shut, locking out the party noise. I expected a frantic apology or at least a desperate explanation for the stolen funds. I expected him to act guilty. Julian smoothed the lapels of his custom-tailored suit jacket and walked behind a imported oak desk. He reached casually into a drawer and tossed a thick stack of crisp legal documents right at my chest. The papers hit me and scattered across the Persian rug. "Pick those up," Julian ordered coldly, acting like a king addressing a peasant. I looked down at the bold print on the top page, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." I stared blankly at the divorce papers resting on the rug, feeling the breath momentarily leave my lungs. "You steal $85,000 while my mother is waiting on a surgical table, forge my signature on a mortgage, and your response is to hand me divorce papers?" I asked. My voice remained terrifyingly calm despite the violent storm of rage raging inside my chest. Julian leaned arrogantly against the edge of the oak desk, crossing his arms with a superior smile. "Let us be honest for a single second, Elena. You were fine for my 20s, and were a nice, quiet, reliable girl who obediently paid the bills while I built my network. But I am playing in the big leagues now. I need a woman who understands real power, someone with pedigree, someone who actually belongs in a spectacular house like this." The study door opened smoothly and a tall, strikingly woman stepped inside. She wore a silk dress and a diamond engagement ring that caught the ambient light. I recognized her from the local news broadcasts. Her father was the powerful sitting mayor of Los Angeles, a man who essentially ran local politics with an iron fist. She looked at my wine-stained clothes, with a sickening mixture of pity and revulsion. Victoria comes from actual political royalty, Julian declared proudly, his chest puffing out. She has the elite connections I need to secure lucrative commercial zoning contracts. Her powerful family name opens doors that your little accounting job could never even approach. I am elevating my social status. Elena, I am building my legacy. You are a forgotten stepping stone from my college days. And I have officially outgrown you. I looked back and forth between my wildly cheating husband and the politician's daughter, and paid his rent when he was struggling to pass his real estate exams. I bought his first professional suits and covered the car payments on his luxury vehicles so he could look successful to his wealthy clients. He had leached parasitically off my hard work to build an illusion of success. And now he was callously discarding me for a woman who could offer him political leverage. You should sign the papers, Elena. Julian has been generous in the settlement terms. He is actually letting you keep your little used car. I turned my attention back to Julian, ignoring her existence. What about the mortgage fraud? Julian laughed a harsh, ugly sound. I am keeping this magnificent house and all the assets attached to the Vanguard Legacy Company. You are taking full legal responsibility for the $150,000 in credit card debt I used to furnish this entire place. Consider it a mandatory exit fee for the sheer privilege of being married to me. You actually expect me to personally pay for the designer furniture in your new mansion with your new fiancé? I asked, my analytical mind cataloging every single detail of his confession. You can pay it off over the next 10 years. Victoria's father is introducing me to major billionaire investors next week. If you refuse to sign, I will drag this divorce out in court until your legal fees bankrupt you, and will destroy your credit and ensure you end up sleeping on the street. I stood still in the middle of the luxurious study, letting his threats wash over me. He genuinely believed he held power. He believed I was a weak, helpless woman who would fold under his aggressive intimidation. He had no idea that I spent my days conducting intense forensic audits, hunting down hidden offshore assets, and systematically dismantling complex corporate fraud rings. Suddenly the study door swung open, and Damien stumbled inside. Chloe's notoriously unemployed husband was holding a plate of catered food in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. He looked genuinely startled to see me standing there. He tripped, dropping the manila folder, dozens of confidential, sensitive financial documents scattered wildly across the hardwood floor, landing right next to my sensible shoes. My trained eyes snapped to the bold black letters prominently printed at the top of the main contract document, Zenith Financial. My gaze moved down the page, taking in the predatory loan terms, the interest rates, and finally, the signature line. The $5.2 million mortgage for this sprawling Malibu property was not in Julian's name. It was exclusively in mine. Julian had intentionally and maliciously forged my signature. I did not scream and smiled coldly. I walked out of the luxurious study without looking back at my cheating husband or his new political trophy, and moved through the crowded, opulent living room, where Beatrice and her elite country club friends were still laughing and drinking their champagne. I walked right out the front doors. The hired valet brought my car around, and I tipped him generously before sliding into the driver's seat, and did not speed or drive erratically on my way back to the Los Angeles Memorial Hospital. By the time I walked back through the sliding glass doors of the intensive care unit, Dr. Aris was standing near the central nurse station holding his clipboard. He looked up and gave me a sympathetic, sad smile, expecting me to tell him that I had failed to gather the funds for the surgery, and stepped forward and started to gently explain the strict hospital policy again, telling me they could perhaps apply for emergency charity grants, but it would undoubtedly take several weeks to process. I raised my hand to stop him mid-sentence. I bypassed the standard banking applications. Instead, I opened an encrypted offshore portal that required a physical biometric security key, and plugged the small titanium key into my drive and pressed my thumb against the glowing scanner. The black screen dissolved into a secure international banking interface. I typed in the hospital's specific wire transfer routing details and authorized an immediate, non-reversible payment of $25,000. The confirmation screen flashed a bright, undeniable green. I turned my laptop screen toward the stunned doctor and told him to check his billing department. My mother was prepped and wheeled into the operating room. As the surgical doors closed behind my mother, I leaned back in my plastic chair and let out a long, steady breath. He actually thought I was a boring bean counter who spent her days staring at mindless spreadsheets for a mediocre corporate salary. He had called me a stepping stone, but he had no idea who I actually was or what I did for a living, and did not balance mundane corporate checkbooks. The police are notoriously slow and tied down by endless jurisdiction laws. Instead, those corporations call my firm. I trace the stolen money through international shell companies, fake charities, and hidden offshore accounts. When I recover those stolen assets, I legally claim a 10% bounty and pulled up my primary portfolio dashboard on the screen. The numbers glowing brightly back at me were undeniable and glorious. I had kept this fortune hidden from Julian and his judgmental family for one simple, heartbreaking reason. Early in our marriage, I received a $40,000 performance bonus. I was so excited to share the amazing news with my husband. He complained bitterly about his own lack of success. He picked fights over nothing. His fragile masculine ego could not handle being significantly out-earned by his wife. To keep the peace and save my failing marriage, I made the heartbreaking decision to shrink myself and created a separate financial identity for my bounties. I let Julian play the role of the big strong provider while I secretly paid off his credit card debts and funded his luxury lifestyle behind the scenes, and had intentionally dimmed my own bright light so his fragile ego could shine, and this housewarming humiliation was my ultimate reward. My phone vibrated on the table next to me, breaking my deep concentration. It was a text message from Julian. The audacity of this man knew no bounds. If you refuse, I will call the police and report your car stolen. He thought taking my life savings and threatening to take my vehicle would break my spirit and force me into submission, and was operating on the flawed assumption that I was a desperate woman who needed his financial mercy, and did not bother replying to his empty threat. I had much bigger and far more destructive plans, and opened a secure communication application on my laptop and dialed a number I had not called in over a year. The man on the other end answered on the second ring. His name was Victor. He was my former boss and a ruthless Wall Street shark who had personally taught me everything I knew about aggressive asset liquidation, hostile takeovers, and corporate warfare. Victor sounded genuinely thrilled to hear my voice, asking what kind of financial trouble I was getting into down in Los Angeles, and did not waste a single second with pleasantries or small talk. I told him I needed to execute a targeted, aggressive corporate maneuver. Victor chuckled darkly through the speaker. He told me that Zenith Financial was currently bleeding amounts of cash and facing incredible internal panic. They had severely overextended themselves on commercial real estate bets during the previous quarter, and were searching for immediate liquidity. I looked down at the forged signature on the digital copy of the mortgage document I had pulled earlier, and could call the local police right this second. I could hand over the definitive undeniable proof of forgery, the digital footprint of the stolen wire transfer, and the unauthorized use of my social security information. Julian would be arrested before dinner was even served at his lavish party. He would be formally charged with federal wire fraud and face decades in a maximum security penitentiary. The powerful mayor would and distance himself to avoid the catastrophic scandal, and Victoria would certainly cancel the high society wedding. But prison was not a severe enough punishment for what he had maliciously done to my dying mother. Prison provides a warm bed, a solid roof, and 3 guaranteed meals a day. If I sent him to jail, he would relentlessly play the ultimate victim. Beatrice would spend the rest of her miserable life telling everyone at her country club that her poor innocent golden boy was maliciously framed by his bitter, insanely jealous ex-wife. I did not want him to go to jail where he could comfortably hide from his failures, and wanted him to feel the same sheer terror and helplessness I felt when the surgeon asked me for money I thought I had safely tucked away. I told Victor to initiate a swift, aggressive, corporate buyout through one of my anonymous offshore holding companies, Obsidian Capital Group. I instructed him to wire $2 million to Zenith Financial by the end of the business day. I was not going to cancel the fraudulent loan or report it to the authorities, and was going to legally buy the entire high-risk debt portfolio that specifically included the Vanguard legacy properties. I was going to legally purchase the specific mortgage to his brand-new Malibu oceanfront mansion. Julian thought he had stolen my money to buy his ultimate dream house, to share with a powerful politician's daughter. I was going to become his mortgage lender, and left the hospital and drove straight toward the financial district. My former Wall Street mentor wore a sharp-tailored suit and poured me a glass of scotch the moment I sat down, and pulled the stolen hard drive from my blazer pocket and slid it across the polished wooden table. I explained the financial trap in meticulous detail. Julian had utilized a classic straw buyer loophole to secure the Malibu mansion. Because his own personal credit was overextended by his luxury car leases and his fake lifestyle, he needed a financial profile to back the $2 million loan. He maliciously used my name and forged my signature on the primary mortgage documents. But Julian was blindingly greedy, and that greed was his fatal flaw. He wanted to use the mansion's equity to fund his fake business empire, and legally cross-collateralize the residential mortgage with the Vanguard legacy corporate accounts. If the mansion mortgage collapsed into default, every single corporate account attached to it would freeze and face immediate, aggressive liquidation. Victor laughed, a deep, booming sound that turned the heads of several nearby executives. He told me it was the most and legally reckless financial structure he had ever seen in his entire 30 years on Wall Street. I logged back into my encrypted offshore banking portal. The interface confirmed my $12 million balance. I typed in the routing digits for Zenith Financial. I authorized the non-reversible wire transfer of $200,000. Victor watched the screen flash green, confirming the transaction had cleared the international servers. I glanced at the bright screen and saw an urgent notification from my local credit union. It was an automated alert regarding the small joint checking account I used solely to pay our mundane household utility bills, and opened the banking application and saw a bright red banner indicating a zero balance. An aggressive legal hold had been placed on the account, my access. The email contained a formal cease and desist letter, demanding I vacate all joint properties and surrender my financial claims. Sterling stated he had frozen my primary banking access to prevent me from hiding marital assets during the divorce proceedings. Julian was intentionally trying to starve me out. He genuinely thought that specific checking account contained my entire life savings. He believed I was currently sitting in my car with zero cash, no place to sleep, and zero legal recourse. He wanted me desperate and wanted me. I looked at Victor and held up a finger signaling for quiet, and cleared my throat, pitched my voice up an octave, and injected a frantic, terrified tremble into my breathing. I dialed Julian's personal cell phone, and started hyperventilating into the receiver. I begged him to tell me what was happening with my checking account, and forced out a fake, desperate sob and pleaded with him to release the funds so I could buy simple groceries and pay for a cheap motel room. I told him he had already taken everything from me, and I had nothing left to fight him with. Julian practically purred into the microphone. He soaked up my fabricated despair like a dry sponge, and told me this was the harsh, undeniable reality of playing in the big leagues. He bragged that his lawyer was a killer, who would relentlessly bury me in endless litigation until I was sleeping on a park bench, and said I brought this entire situation on myself by disrespecting his mother and sister at the garden party, and forced another whimper and begged him for a truce. I asked him what I needed to do to make the incredible pain stop. Julian let out a slow sigh, relishing his dominance over my life. He told me he was hosting a formal engagement gala at the Malibu mansion tomorrow evening. The entire family would be there, along with Victoria and her powerful mayor father. He instructed me to arrive at 7 p.m., wearing something presentable. He demanded I bring the signed divorce papers and the executed quitclaim deed, surrendering my rights to the house. He stated that if I handed over the documents and publicly apologized to Victoria for my embarrassing behavior, he would graciously show me mercy. He promised to give me a certified check for $10,000 as a parting gift, so I could rent a miserable little apartment on the other side of town. He told me to swallow my pride and accept the handout because it was the only money I was ever going to see again, and managed to choke out a convincing and grateful thank you before hanging up the phone. I dropped the frantic victim persona, my face went stone. Victor was shaking his head in sheer disbelief at the unmitigated audacity of the man. I took a slow sip of my scotch, letting the fiery liquid burn pleasantly down my throat. Julian wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to show his mother and sister that he had finally conquered the woman who had supported him for years. I was more than happy to oblige his request. A sharp chime echoed from my laptop speakers. A secured email had landed in my encrypted inbox from the executive vice president of Zenith Financial. I opened the attached legal file. Every single asset Julian claimed to possess now legally belonged to me. I opened a blank legal template on my screen and drafted a detailed notice of immediate default and aggressive asset seizure. I detailed the specific undeniable clauses regarding mortgage fraud and cross-collateralization. I connected my laptop to Victor's secure office printer. The machine hummed efficiently to life, printing the legal document on thick, high-quality ivory cardstock. I picked up the crisp, warm paper and traced my fingers over the bold black ink and folded the eviction notice and slid it into my blazer. I was ready for the engagement gala and walked out of Victor's secure office building, feeling the cool morning air brace my lungs. The ivory paper of the eviction notice rested warmly inside the breast pocket of my blazer. I got into my car and drove straight back to Los Angeles Memorial Hospital. My mother had finally been moved out of the intensive care unit and into a private recovery room on the 4th floor. When I walked through the door, she was sitting up safely in bed, drinking a clear cup of broth and peacefully watching a daytime television show. Eris had stopped by earlier to confirm the complex operation was a complete success and she needed quiet time to heal. I sat in the plastic chair beside her bed, holding her warm hand, and listened to her talk peacefully. And did not mention Julian or mention the divorce, the stolen $85,000, or the impending eviction of my in-laws. I let her exist in peace while I mind the upcoming warfare. Around noon, my mother fell into a deep healing sleep. I gently released her hand and stepped out of the room to grab a cup of black coffee from the hospital cafeteria on the ground floor. The cafeteria was mostly empty at this hour, echoing with the quiet hum of vending machines and the hushed conversations of exhausted medical staff. I bought my coffee and sat alone at a small corner table near the windows, and pulled out my phone, connecting it to the secure encrypted cloud, where I had uploaded the contents of Julian's hidden hard drive. I was engrossed in a complex spreadsheet detailing Damien's fraudulent tech startup when a dark shadow fell across my screen. Standing in front of my small laminate table was Victoria. She was wearing a tailored designer pantsuit that cost more than a nurse's annual salary. Standing right beside her, projecting an aura of intimidation, was her powerful father, Mayor Richard Vance. I recognized him from the endless campaign billboards and local television commercials scattered across the city. He was an imposing man with thick silver hair and a practiced political smile that did not quite reach his calculating eyes. They had used their extensive connections to track me down to this hospital. Victoria pulled out a plastic cafeteria chair and sat down across from me, uninvited. Her father remained standing, looming over the table like a dangerous mob boss trying to intimidate a local shopkeeper. Victoria crossed her arms and stared at me, with that same sickening mixture of pity and revulsion she had prominently displayed in Julian's study. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and said Julian had informed her about my mother's emergency surgery and my unfortunate financial struggles. I locked my phone screen and placed it face down, and looked back and forth between the cheating fiancé and the corrupt politician. I asked them what they wanted. Mayor Vance finally sat down in the empty chair next to his daughter. He smoothed his silk tie and placed a leather briefcase on the table between us. Mayor Vance leaned in close, lowering his booming political voice into a conspiratorial whisper. They had a reputation to maintain. He explained that Victoria's upcoming wedding to Julian was not a simple marriage but a strategic, political merger. He said he had major billionaire investors, local business leaders, and national political figures attending the ceremony, and said he knew I was being stubborn about signing the quitclaim deed and the divorce papers. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp, rectangular piece of paper and slid it across the laminate table until it stopped right next to my coffee cup. I glanced down at the bold printed numbers, $100,000. The mayor told me to take the hush money. He instructed me to sign the divorce documents, sign the quitclaim deed to the Malibu mansion, and disappear from Julian's life forever. Victoria chimed in with her sickeningly sweet, condescending voice. She told me $100, son. Dollars was amount of money for a woman in my desperate situation, and smiled a razor-sharp grin, and told me I should be on my knees thanking them for their incredible generosity. She said Julian had outgrown me, and it was time for me to accept my place at the bottom of the social ladder. Mayor Vance tapped his gold watch. He told me he was a busy man and he did not have time to negotiate with disgruntled ex-wives, and said $100,000 was his final offer. If I refused to take it, he promised to use his extensive political connections to ensure I never found another accounting job in the state of California. He threatened to have my professional licenses revoked and my reputation. He had no idea he had walked into a fatal financial trap. I reached out and placed my index finger on the edge of the paper and slid the check right back across the table until it touched the mayor's manicured hand. I looked into his eyes and told him he was significantly underestimating his opponent. I told the mayor I did not want his illegal campaign funds and asked him if he honestly thought Julian was smart enough to hide his tracks. I told him I had spent the last 9 years conducting international forensic audits. Then I dropped the hammer and recited the routing numbers and the dollar amounts that had been illegally funneled from his political campaign donations into those untraceable accounts over the past 36 months. I watched the political smirk vanish from Mayor Vance's face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. Her father held up a hand to silence her. He was breathing, staring at me with wide, panicked eyes. I smiled coldly and told him Julian had been managing those offshore transfers through his real estate firm, using the Vanguard Legacy corporate accounts to wash the money. I warned the mayor that associating with a sloppy fool like Julian was going to destroy his political career and land him in a federal penitentiary. The powerful mayor was thoroughly spooked. His hands visibly shook as he snatched the check off the table and shoved it back into his pocket. He realized that I held the power to annihilate his entire political empire with a single phone call, and stood up from the table, grabbing my coffee. I told the mayor to bring his checkbook to the engagement gala tomorrow night. I promised him I would provide the best political consulting he had ever received. Saturday evening arrived with a stifling, oppressive humidity that clung to the manicured lawns of the sprawling Malibu estate. Valets in crisp white shirts scrambled furiously to park sleek sports cars and black SUVs. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was electric, with the intoxicating hum of old money and concentrated political power. I stood outside the mahogany double doors for a brief moment, listening to the smooth live jazz band echoing through the cavernous foyer, and could hear the sharp clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the booming laughter of men who genuinely believed they owned the city. At the center of it all was the formal dining room. Through the towering archways, I could distinctly see Beatrice holding court at the head of a mahogany table custom-built to seat 40 guests. She gestured wildly with a diamond-encrusted hand, recounting a fabricated story about how her brilliant son had single-handedly built their family empire from nothing. The sycophantic socialites and wealthy politicians' wives seated around her nodded eagerly, soaking up every single delusional word. He held a glass of dark scotch, laughing and slapping men on the shoulder, and was playing the wealthy host, projecting an aura of dominance and undeniable financial invincibility. Victoria floated right beside him, acting the part of the devoted high society fiancée. She wore a cut emerald dress, happily introducing Julian to her father's elite political donors. Mayor Vance was standing near the stone fireplace, looking uncharacteristically nervous. His earlier extreme arrogance was replaced by a lingering, paranoid dread. He knew what information I held over him, but he was trapped playing his part in this elaborate charade, and pushed open the front doors and stepped purposefully into the grand foyer. I was no longer the exhausted, stressed-out woman wearing practical, off-the-rack beige blazers, and had spent the entire afternoon visiting an exclusive boutique in downtown Los Angeles. I was currently wearing a $6,000 custom-tailored midnight blue velvet power suit. The cut was commanding immediate attention and projecting sheer ruthless authority. The sharp lines of the jacket and the drape of the trousers made me look like an apex predator, stepping into a room full of unsuspecting prey. I walked purposefully past the hired waitstaff and stepped into the grand dining room. The incredible transformation in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The lively jazz music seemed to fade into a muted, terrified background hum. The loud conversations died out one by one as the city's elite turned to stare at the woman invading their exclusive sanctuary. The sprawling room went dead silent, 60 pairs of judgmental eyes locked onto my midnight blue suit. Beatrice froze mid-sentence, her diamond-encrusted hand hovering stiffly in the air, her triumphant smile curdling into an expression of sheer venomous outrage. Julian spun around, spilling a splash of scotch onto his tuxedo sleeve. His eyes widened in sheer panic as he realized the woman he had discarded like cheap trash was standing in the middle of his high society coming-out party. Julian slammed his crystal glass onto a passing waiter's silver tray and marched straight toward me. His face was flushed dark with fury. He closed the distance between us, stopping inches from my face, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me, and lowered his voice to a harsh, aggressive whisper, hoping the nearby politicians could not hear his sudden, catastrophic lack of control. "What the hell are you doing here, Elena?" he demanded, his chest heaving with suppressed rage. "Look at you, did you put those cheap clothes on a credit card you cannot afford to pay off?" "I brought the papers you specifically wanted, Julian," I stated, my voice carrying across the silent dining room, and made sure my tone was smooth and unbothered. "I thought you wanted me to hand them over, so we could finalize this transition tonight." Julian froze, his eyes locked onto the manila folder in my hand. The sheer greed overrode his temporary panic. He genuinely believed he had won. He smoothed his lapels and plastered on a fake, benevolent smile. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with condescending superiority. "You can stay for the engagement dinner, but you will sign the documents when I tell you to, and gratefully accept the severance check I am graciously providing." I smiled warmly at my wildly cheating husband. "Thank you, Julian," I replied smoothly, sliding right past him and ignored the whispers and the glaring looks. I pulled out a wooden chair and sat down, making myself comfortable, and placed the manila folder in the center of my gold-rimmed plate. Beatrice glared at me across the sprawling centerpiece of imported white roses. She leaned forward, tightly gripping the edge of the table. "You have incredible nerve showing your face here," Beatrice hissed, her voice low and threatening. "Do not think that ridiculous blue suit hides the undeniable fact that you are nothing but common street trash." I did not respond to her venomous insults and picked up a crystal decanter and poured myself a generous glass of vintage red wine. I set the glass down and let my unyielding gaze drift down the length of the dining table. past Victoria, past Julian. My eyes finally locked onto Damien. Chloe's unemployed husband was sitting halfway down the table, stuffing his face with catered lobster. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table, and ignored Beatrice and Julian. I powerfully projected my voice so it echoed off the vaulted ceilings, ensuring every single billionaire politician and elite socialite heard what I was about to say. "So Damien," I said, a sharp predatory smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. His prominent Adam's apple bobbed nervously above his tight designer collar. The polite chatter died away as the billionaires and socialites leaned in, sensing fresh blood in the water. Damien cleared his throat and puffed out his chest, attempting to project the confidence he always utilized to mask his incompetence. He announced that his new venture was a disruptive Web3 integrated logistics platform. He threw out a messy, chaotic word salad of complex tech jargon he had memorized from a late-night podcast. I rested my chin on my folded hands and stared at him with unblinking predatory focus, and did not interrupt him once. I waited until he finally ran out of meaningless buzzwords and paused to take a nervous, trembling sip of his ice water. Then I struck. I asked him to detail his initial cash burn rate and his projected timeline for the seed round valuation, and asked him which specific intellectual property, legal firm, was handling his trademark filings and where his corporate escrow accounts were currently domiciled. I fired off the complex questions in rapid succession using unforgiving financial terminology. Damien's facade into a million pieces, he began to stammer, wiping a sudden bead of sweat from his upper lip, and mumbled something incoherent about agile development and beta testing phases. He looked at Chloe, hoping his spoiled wife would save him from the public slaughter. Chloe glared back at him, her long acrylic nails tapping against the table. She demanded I answer the questions and prove to the room that her husband was a legitimate CEO. Damien could not answer a single question. I smiled sweetly at him and told the entire table that his brilliant tech startup did not exist. I announced with authority that there was no proprietary software, no offshore servers, and zero intellectual property. I told the room that Damien was nothing but a lazy con artist who had swindled his own brother-in-law out of an amount of stolen money. Chloe stood up from her chair, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the bright light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. She screamed at me to shut my mouth and stop disrespecting her husband in front of the powerful mayor. She announced that Julian had personally wired the seed money into Damien's verified corporate business account 4 days ago. I reached into the thick manila folder resting on my dinner plate and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper covered in detailed banking transaction logs. I told her to look closely at the routing numbers and the final, undeniable destination of her husband's brilliant business investment. I casually explained the route the stolen money had taken while the entire room listened in stunned fascination. I told them that Damien wired the entire $300,000 balance from the Vanguard Legacy corporate account straight to an illegal offshore casino based out of Macau. Chloe's face drained of all color, her mouth fell open in sheer horror as she stared blindly at the printed confirmation of the wire transfers. I did not give her a single second to breathe, and told her that Damien was a degenerate gambler who honestly believed he had figured out a foolproof betting algorithm. I explained that her brilliant CEO husband had placed the entire $300,000 seed investment on a risky horse race over the weekend. Damien jumped out of his chair, knocking over his crystal wine glass. The dark red liquid pooled across the white tablecloth. He screamed that I was lying. Every single dollar Julian had fraudulently pulled from the Malibu mansion's equity line of credit was gone. Chloe let out a piercing, guttural scream that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The fragile illusion of her high society life in a single instant. She grabbed her fine china dinner plate and hurled it at Damien's head. The plate against his shoulder, sending pieces of buttered lobster and porcelain flying wildly across the immaculate room. Beatrice jumped to her feet, her face turning a mottled shade of purple. She was mortified that her elite billionaire friends and vital political connections were witnessing this raw, ghetto behavior in her new home and slammed her diamond-encrusted hand against the table and screamed at Chloe to stop acting like a wild animal. Julian could no longer maintain his facade of control. His bespoke tuxedo was splattered with dark red wine, and his planned political merger was collapsing into a humiliating circus. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany table, rattling the crystal decanters. "You signed away your rights to this house." Julian screamed, his voice cracking with desperate rage. "Give me the quitclaim deed right now, and get the hell out of my sight." I smirked, leaning back in my dining chair, unfazed by his aggressive screaming. I held it up to the glittering chandelier light. "I did not bring a quitclaim deed, Julian," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the ringing silence of the devastated room. "I brought your official eviction notice." I threw the manila folder onto the center of the dining table, and did not break eye contact with my cheating husband as I raised my voice, ensuring every single billionaire politician and high society socialite in the sprawling room heard my next words with crystal clarity. I told Julian his entire luxurious lifestyle was built on a crumbling foundation of federal wire fraud and forged signatures. I explained to the captivated wealthy audience how the brilliant real estate mogul had actually managed to purchase this Malibu mansion. I detailed how my loving husband had secretly accessed my locked filing cabinet, maliciously copied my confidential social security number, and fabricated my financial consent on the primary lending documents. I told the room that Julian had forged my signature on over 40 pages of binding federal banking contracts. Mayor Vance took a deliberate physical step away from Victoria, looking at Julian like he had contracted a contagious, deadly disease. Julian threw his head back and forced a loud, booming laugh. It was a hollow, desperate sound. He proclaimed that even if my wildly dramatic accusations were somehow true, the Malibu mansion was fundamentally a marital asset. He mansplained that he was the one making the monthly payments to the Zenith Financial Group. He puffed out his chest and stated that his robust corporate accounts were thoroughly flushed with cash and his standing with the bank was. He declared that I possessed zero legal power to evict him from a property where he held the primary deed. He ordered me to stop playing pretend lawyer. I remained still, letting his desperate monologue run its full, uninterrupted course. I stood up from my wooden chair and told him he was right. I watched his smile widen for a tiny fraction of a second before I annihilated his fragile reality. But as of Friday afternoon, Zenith Financial bundled your high-risk, cross-collateralized fraudulent mortgage and sold the entire debt package to an offshore corporate holding company for pennies on the dollar. I announced to the dead silent room that the powerful offshore firm was called Obsidian Capital Group. I told Julian that I was the exclusive owner of Obsidian Capital Group. "You no longer owe a single dime to Zenith Financial." I leaned across the table, closing the tense distance between us. "I am your bank." Julian froze, his entire body locked up as the crushing magnitude of his catastrophic financial ruin settled over him. He could not speak, and stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, his constructed empire collapsing in real time. I told him that because he maliciously secured this specific loan via direct federal wire fraud, the lending contract triggered an immediate aggressive acceleration clause and stated that the entire principal balance of $5.2 million was due right now. "You have 60 seconds to pay me, or I am taking the entire house." 59, 58. I counted the seconds out loud, letting my voice drop to a terrifyingly calm cadence. Julian stood frozen at the head of the table. He wiped a thick layer of grease and sweat from his panicked forehead, and looked at Beatrice, but she was paralyzed. "Mayor, please," Julian begged, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his impending ruin. "It is a temporary minor cash flow bottleneck. Write the check. We are about to be family." 30 seconds, I called out. Mayor Vance yanked his custom-tailored sleeve out of Julian's desperate grasp. "You are a walking federal indictment," Vance spit, his powerful voice laced with disgust. "Do not ever speak to me or my successful daughter again." Victoria was shaking with unbearable humiliation. She reached down and yanked the diamond engagement ring off her finger, and reared back and threw the ring at Julian's sweaty chest. The diamond bounced off his wine-stained tuxedo shirt and landed with a sharp clatter onto the mahogany table. The billionaires, the wealthy venture capitalists, the local politicians, and the elite socialites scrambled over each other to escape the blast radius. Wooden chairs were pushed back, scraping against the imported Italian marble floors. High heels clicked down the opulent hallway as the wealthy guests fled the sprawling mansion like desperate rats abandoning a sinking luxury ship. 15 seconds, I announced, watching the grand foyer descend into uncontrollable chaos as 60 elite guests yelled for the overwhelmed valets to retrieve their imported cars. The crushing reality of her entire elite social standing evaporating before her eyes triggered a hysterical meltdown. "Fix this disaster, Julian," she wildly shrieked, her shrill voice echoing over the loud sounds of fleeing guests. "Call your wealthy investors. You promised me this house. I cannot go back to a cramped, miserable apartment. Do not let this cheap little accountant take my mansion." But there were no wealthy investors left to call. Julian looked at the empty wooden chairs, the spilled wine, the porcelain, and the abandoned diamond ring resting on the mahogany table. His constructed, fake empire was gone. His long legs gave out beneath him. He pressed his trembling hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Elena, please," he whimpered pathetically, his strained voice breaking into a high-pitched sob. "Please do not do this to me. I have nothing left." I lowered my wrist and stared into his terrified, bloodshot eyes. "Time is up," I stated. Default confirmed. Suddenly, a deep, mechanical rumbling sound began to vibrate through the front windows of the grand dining room. The loud, aggressive roar of diesel engines cut through the fading noise of the panicked, fleeing guests. Julian flinched, looking toward the grand archway, out in the sprawling circular driveway. 2 duty flatbed tow trucks were already parked on the manicured lawn. The harsh pulsing yellow strobe lights cut through the humid California night, illuminating the aggressive repo men as they efficiently attached steel chains to the axles of his silver Porsche and his customized black Range Rover. I had cross-collateralized his luxury car loans as well. Beatrice watched her son's luxury fleet get hauled away, and something deep inside her fragile, constructed reality snapped. She shoved past her weeping son and marched up to me. She vigorously thrust a trembling, manicured finger mere close inches from my calm face. She proclaimed that she had established permanent squatter rights by residing in the master wing for the past 6 months. I looked at Beatrice with a chilling, empty smile and told her that the Coleman family had not actually possessed a single dime of actual, real generational wealth in over an entire decade. I explained that her exclusive country club fees, her luxury leased vehicles, and the glittering designer gown she was currently wearing were all secretly paid for by my corporate bonuses. I told her she was nothing but a broke, unemployed elderly woman who had been unknowingly surviving on the generous charity of the same daughter-in-law she had maliciously treated like garbage. Suddenly, the oak front doors of the sprawling mansion were thrown open with a violent, resounding crash. Tactical boots echoed sharply against the imported Italian marble of the grand foyer. 2 large armed sheriff's deputies marched into the dining room. "We have an emergency eviction order issued by a powerful federal judge due to verified property fraud," the lead deputy announced, his deep voice cutting through the utter chaos. "Vacate the premises and..." The lead deputy slapped a thick stack of federal foreclosure documents onto the mahogany table. He warned that any aggressive attempt to delay or physically remove assets belonging to the estate would result in immediate, aggressive physical arrest. Absolute, uncontrollable pandemonium erupted inside the grand dining room. Beatrice let out a blood-curdling shriek and began scrambling around the violent wreckage of the dining table. She grabbed her oversized designer handbag and started shoveling sterling silver forks into the leather tote. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and grabbed her trembling wrist with unyielding force. "Leave it," I commanded firmly, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "It belongs to the bank, you only take your cheap clothes." While Beatrice unraveled under the deputy's watchful eye, Julian had slipped out of the dining room. I watched his terrified shadow dart down the grand hallway toward the west wing. He was making a desperate panic dash toward his private home office. I knew where he was going. I followed my frantic husband down the long, opulent corridor. Julian threw open the oak doors of his office and shoved an abstract painting aside, revealing a hidden digital wall safe. He genuinely believed he kept $200,000 in untraceable bundled cash inside that safe for catastrophic emergencies. The steel door clicked and swung open. Julian let out a desperate gasp and thrust his shaking hands into the dark cavity. He froze, his broad shoulders went rigid. The safe was empty. I had instructed Victor to legally freeze and drain every single hidden corporate account tied to the property 3 long hours ago. Julian turned around, looking at me with wide, dead eyes. He finally realized the extent of my revenge. I had taken his house, his luxurious cars, his fake business, his powerful political connections, and every single hidden dollar he thought he actually had, and offered him a final, chilling smile, turned my back, and walked away from the total ruins of his fake empire. 1 long year later, the oppressive, aggressive California heat was nothing more than a fading memory. I sat comfortably on the stone patio of the renovated Malibu oceanfront compound and swiped across my sleek silver tablet, relaxed, reviewing the intricate blueprints for a new construction project. Julian and Beatrice had exhausted their desperate, endless stream of legal appeals. Julian had been sentenced to 15 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for wire fraud and explicit, aggressive identity theft. Damien was investigated for illegal offshore gambling. Beatrice had moved into a cramped, tiny apartment on the wrong side of town. I had transformed the ballroom of the sprawling Malibu estate into the headquarters for a powerful financial literacy foundation. We provided rigorous, deep forensic auditing resources and comprehensive, aggressive legal protection to shield vulnerable women from the type of financial abuse I had suffered, and looked out over the crashing waves of the blue Pacific Ocean, feeling relaxed and powerful. They genuinely thought keeping me locked in the dark would keep me weak and controlled. But you cannot lock a dedicated forensic data analyst in the dark and not expect her to eventually find the master switch.